I'm talking with Jane Blundell, Australian watercolour artist, as part of our Meet the Artists October event. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Fiona. Nice to meet you.
You too. So tell us a little bit about you and what art making looks like for you.
Well, it's something I've been doing as long as I can remember. I was one of those kids who was always drawing, and I thought everyone could draw. It wasn't until I was maybe 10 or 11 that people would say, "Oh, can you draw me this? Can you draw me that?" That I started to realise that for some reason some people didn't or couldn't. But I've continued to draw and sketch and paint all my life since as long as I can remember. I think when I was 7, my parents gave me a set of 72 Derwent pencils, and that was just Christmas on a stick. I was always interested in markers and in paints and in colours, and used to experiment with all sorts of things with colours. Did art right through high school, went on to do a fine arts course, majoring in etching, then did a dip ed, and increasingly did more and more teaching, which I love. And I've continued to paint and draw and teach, my whole life. So it's ongoing. But I moved from etching
to
to
pretty exotic locations, don't you?
Sorry?
You teach in some pretty exotic locations.
Oh yes, I have a wonderful time. I get to go to all sorts of places. I was just in Lord Howe Island a couple of weeks ago to do an exploratory, because I thought that would be an amazing place to run a week-long watercolour workshop or sketching workshop. I was teaching in Amsterdam earlier in the year, in July, and in Cairns in June. I teach in Bathurst a couple of times, and I've taught in Singapore and New York and Canada and lots of places. It's great, and I try and sketch everywhere I go. So I'll have some sort of record of where I've been in my sketchbook, as well as obviously the memories of teaching there.
Right. I think we're going to get to have a peek at your sketchbooks later on.
Yes, I made a video for that so that I could take through just 5 of them. My current one is number 73, I think. So they go back a while, and not all of those are finished, to be fair. Sometimes I'll start a sketchbook and I just don't like it. I don't like the paper. It's too cream, or it doesn't take the watercolour well. So I've got a couple that I just haven't enjoyed. But most of them are finished, and they range in the way I use them. And the ones I'll be showing are the ones that I've sat down and deliberately spent an hour or two, or sometimes more, working on some sketches.
Right. So you're really passionate about colour, Jane, and I know you have some fantastic resources explaining colour and pigment and all of that. So tell us a little bit about that and how you got really passionate about colour in your art making.
Well, as I mentioned, I've always been interested in colour, but it wasn't until actually the first time I used Daniel Smith watercolours, which was back in 1997. They were released, no, 95. They were released in 93. So they're actually a pretty new brand. So I started using them in 95. And they were the first watercolours that had the pigments written on them, as far as I'm aware. And I saw these numbers on the tubes, and I thought, well, what's that? Now, this is kind of pre-internet. You couldn't exactly look everything up, so I had to start doing some research and trying to find out what it was that I was looking at, because it seemed to be quite important. And of course, it's essential. It's one of those things you just have to know and understand if you're really going to get the most out of your colours. So it can save a lot of money, but it can also save a lot of time, and it can help you to understand what's in the paints and which you should buy and which you just shouldn't bother with. So I started researching pigments from there. And I just loved the way the Daniel Smith paints worked, and the way that they granulated, and some of these gorgeous colours. So that's probably what started. I started doing a book about them sometime later, just painting them all out. I can show you if you want.
Yeah, we'd love to see it. I think you've written more than one book. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, this one isn't a published book. This is just my own. This is the stuff I do for fun. So this one just goes through every colour. Not quite sure. Can you see it there?
Yeah, it's better when you turn it away from the window light, because the window light's a little bit.
Like that?
Yeah, we can see it now. Mm-hmm.
Right, so I've gone through every single colour that they produced, and then tested them out and found out the information and looked up books on the pigments and explored how they mixed and, you know, just gone through what they do. And I've done this with a lot of colours and a lot of paints and these sorts of things. I'll come a bit closer so you can see this amazing granulation was what I found so interesting. So this whole book is just lots and lots and lots and lots of swatches of colour and research and reading things. And so this was the sort of thing, this was the second one. I started a smaller one but ran out of room, so this was in a bigger one. But that was just the kind of the way I wanted to research it so I could start to learn and teach myself, because I wasn't taught any of this at, you know, at art school. They don't tell you about pigments. So it's something I had to try and figure out. And then with the internet, obviously, it gets easier, and sites like Handprint that have huge amounts of information, and others who put the work into it. So that sort of information sort of started happening then, and I've just continued to look into all the different brands and what they're using and which pigments to use and which not to use. And I've done my light fast tests, sticking things onto north-facing windows and seeing how they go. Noting which ones work and often finding it's not necessarily exactly what the manufacturers say. So I've tested things out for myself, because I think in Australia we have such an incredibly powerful sun. We have to be very careful, even more so than anyone in England, for example. So, so yeah, that all started, the pigment information started back in 1995.
Right. And it's so fascinating when you make that discovery, isn't it? I found out about pigment and the numbers by accident during an art workshop from another participant, not even from the instructor. And I was describing a problem I was having, and it was definitely a light bulb moment, and now that's a big part of my teaching too. And I love the fact that I've been dipping into your blog and your website for several years now to find information when I'm researching a particular pigment. It's wonderful. So,
well, it's something I was teaching a workshop, and I had a guy who came to the class, and he'd been teaching watercolour for 40 years. And I was talking about all these things, and he said, "What's those P things you keep saying?" And I said, "The pigment numbers?" And he said, "Yes, what are they?" So I showed him a tube and showed him what they are and explained. He'd been teaching watercolour for 40 years and didn't know. And you just
wow.
Think, how?
How do you do that? Yeah, it's pretty essential. Yeah.
Yes,
So what are you working on currently, Dane? What's happening for you at the moment?
I am working on creating I have an online course, and I'm actually doing the videos for it. So I've been teaching it through email with a PDF series, and I'm now actually filming the videos, so working through it. I've been working on how to edit video and how to film it and how to set it up. So I'm finally just biting the bullet and doing it. So that's just working my way through my own course, step by step, filming all the way and creating the videos.
I feel your pain.
Sorry?
I feel your pain. I've been there this year, steep learning curve. But yeah, it's wonderful to be able to articulate it more thoroughly and capture it in that format. So if you were going to give some tips for beginners, what would be on your top tips?
Yeah, good question. I like to get people started with professional colours as soon as possible. I think that student ranges often come in great palettes, and I tend to flick out most of the colours and replace them with artist quality, because I think that otherwise you're working with just the colour instead of the characteristics. And there are so many interesting characteristics that we can explore. And watercolour is the only medium where we can explore those characteristics rather than just the colour. So to explain that, the characteristics of watercolour are, and I hope I'm not teaching anyone to suck eggs, but the transparency, opacity. So, you know, whether it's transparent or whether it's opaque, and both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Whether they granulate or whether they don't, whether they lift or whether they stain, and of course then, you know, the light fast rating is important as well. And then of course there's the colour hue, you know, whether it's warm or cool and those sorts of things. But as far as the characteristics are concerned, understanding that enables you to use it in a much more varied manner, so that you can choose whether you use a blue, for example, you might choose a cool blue, but if you want to lift out clouds, you wouldn't use a phthalo blue or a Windsor blue because it's going to stain. You would use a cerulean or perhaps an ultramarine if you want a warm one, so then you can lift it out. So that sort of knowledge is really helpful. But if you're using student colours, they'll be made with any sort of mixture of cheaper pigments, and those characteristics won't be obvious. They're designed to be as similar as possible so that people don't think that there are little spots in their paint, which is the granulation, and you don't have all those other things to play with. So I would always suggest use professional colour, even if you're just starting out, and start with a relatively limited palette to get to know them and gradually add to them, which I think is the way you do it as well.
Yeah, we're definitely on the same page with that.
Yeah, I actually tend to start students with 20 colours, but understanding that some of them are mixtures of colours in the palette as well and so on, but just so that they have a start, 20 or less. But you know, I just think that working with professional colours, decent paper, and the best few brushes that you can afford, I think just gives you a much better experience than going cheap and getting frustrated and wondering why it's even harder than everyone says it's going to be.
Exactly. That's great. So you've got some pretty special relationship going with Daniel Smith, right? And you've created some specialty palettes for those who are kind of moving on to another level, particularly around urban sketching and things like that. Is that right?
Well, some years ago I designed, because people were always saying, well, what colours should I use? And I came up with a set of 15 that really can do anything you want to do. So as long as you understand how to mix them, you can create any colour you want to mix. And so I thought, no, 12 never seemed quite enough. There are always too many limitations. Once I sort of got up, I tried 13, I tried 14, and at 15 I thought, yes, I can actually make any colour I want and also have a mixture of the characteristics. So some are transparent and some are staining and some are granulating and so on. And so that set was something that I created, and then I did a book to explain it. And I showed all the mixes. Sorry? And then last year, Daniel Smith came out with some pan colours. I think quite a few people have been asking them to make some pan colours. And one of the sets that they put out was the 15 colours that I'd suggested. You've probably seen it, but I'll just grab one.
Yeah. It's quite compact, isn't it?
Yes. It's small. So it's that, just turned away from the light. And that has the 15 colours that I suggest. And they will work for urban sketching or botanical sketching or sort of anything. But the idea was never that that's the only colours you're ever allowed to use. I mean, in my palette, I add some mixed greens and some other earth colours that you could mix from these, but I just find I use them a lot. And so, you know, because you could always make your own mixes. If you buy the tubes, you can mix up whatever colours you want as convenience colours. But that was the set. And then they released it. So one of the colours is Jane's Grey, which is the ultramarine and burnt sienna, and they released that as a tube. So that's pretty fun too.
Well, it's pretty fun to have a paint named after you.
It is, yes, it is. No, well, it's something that's, I mean, it started as a little bit of a joke. I was talking about, you know, I originally called it Bist because that meant in Italian, I think, a mixed grey, but it also means a brown in French. So that was confusing. And then someone said, well, then what's that bistra? And I said, no, it's the grey I make, you know, Jane's Grey. And that was a nice little pun on Payne's Grey because it's a grey without the paint.
Exactly.
But anyway, it's a really useful colour for shadows and as a neutral tint and all sorts of things. And it was something that didn't really exist in any other paint. A grey that's not using a black, and so not staining. And so it's I think it's quite a good addition. I mean, we all make it, but I wasn't aware of anyone else pre-making it and having it ready in the palette so that you can just touch your brush to it and go, rather than having to go mix the whole time. And I just found it just so useful in that format. So yes, that's that palette, and then the tube. They're working on some other colours as well. So couple of blacks, and we'll see what happens with those.
Yeah. So what's next for you, Jane, in terms of projects or upcoming things?
Well, I'm working on another book. So I've done 2 books, and I'm working on another one which has the working title, Working with Triads. So a lot of what I teach and what I enjoy playing with is working with carefully chosen triads, whether a primary triad or not, but really looking at how to look at a subject and narrow it down to which would be the best yellow, which would be the best red, which would be the best blue to use, or even, do you need a blue? Would it be better to use a green, for example, and really narrow it down? And then if it's an earthy palette, then trying to have those all matching, or if it's a very subdued palette, have a play with those. And so everything always has the colours with the same characteristics. So if you were to try and put that into another way of thinking about it, for people who are familiar with, say, permanent rose or quinacridone rose, as it's known, if you picture that, super bright pink, and then you picture phthalo blue, super bright blue, and then you've got the lemon yellow that you use. So that's going to make a really good, bright, cool palette that will do anything. But if we took the quinacridone rose out and put potter's pink in, you'd be overpowering that potter's pink with the other colours. And it just would be really, really hard to work with, because you could never really balance it out. Whereas if you wanted to use potter's pink, and if those are familiar with it, it's a very soft granulating pink. You could use that with the goethite, which is an earthy yellow, and you could use it with a manganese blue or something that's a bit more gentle. And then you're sharing the characteristics, and it's all going to work as a harmonious picture. Oh, so I do a lot with that.
I think you've prepared a gift for the Confident Artist participants, right? That's sort of talking about some of your primary triads, is that right?
That's right. It's got 3 of them, and it's just showing them briefly. So it's got an Aussie triad. I think that's appropriate. Yeah. So a crimson and a warm yellow and an ultramarine, and then the cool triad, which is what I just mentioned. So that's a yellow and a phthalo blue and rose, and then an earth triad, which I love, which is a goethite and Indian red and cerulean chromium, which are Daniel Smith names. But basically, it's a cerulean and an earth. And then this very granulating yellow. And then in each time I've painted out something using those, just to show what you can do with them. So it's just a bit of fun. So it's a bit of a preview of this book that I'm eventually going to get around to. Okay. But I'll get there. It just all takes time.
It really does. And we're very thankful for you sharing your time with us today, Jane. You're just such a fount of information and learning. I'm so excited to introduce you to everybody at The Confident Artist, and thanks for spending time with us today. So tell us, where can we connect with you?
You can connect on, I have a website, www.janeblundellart.com. There's a link there to my blog, which is janeblundellart.blogspot.com. I'm on Instagram as Jane Blundell Art. I'm on Facebook as Jane Blundell Artist, though I'm not using Facebook as much these days. I find Instagram is just much more, well, there's much less political stuff, and you see less of a certain person on Instagram than you do on Facebook. So I'm tending to use Instagram more. I don't do Twitter, but yeah, you can find me. It's a bit hard to avoid.
Well, thanks. We've enjoyed finding you today. So thanks, Jane, very much for your time, and all the best with your painting.
Thank you. And to you, Fiona.
Bye-bye.
Bye.